Well, hello everybody, and welcome to part 2 of our Fisher X-101-C video. So really, before we start on any kind of modifications or anything, the first thing I want to do is get this transformer straightened out. It's really kind of bent. It looks just like the bells. The little flanges on the bells got bent. So I think I might be able to just remove those and straighten everything out. I may clean this up and possibly touch up the paint while I'm at it too. I'm not sure. I really didn't want to get into a crazy, like a big refurb on this thing or anything, because it's really pretty nice how it is. But these screws are almost, if I kind of bring you in real close here, these screws are just kind of, especially this one here and on the other side, you can see it's almost pulled through the flange. So I almost feel compelled to actually take these off and repair them and put it back on. This transformer only has 2 windings. It has the primary winding, of course, and then 2 secondary windings. It just has the 6.3 volt filament and the high voltage output. They're not center tapped, so really I would only have to disconnect a total of 6 wires to get this thing out. So I think that's what I'm going to do on this. I don't know if I'm going to repaint the bells. There is a little tiny bit of surface rust kind of stuff, but I may just polish it up a little bit. If I do that and then I don't do the output transformers, then, and then once you start doing that, now you're doing a full overhaul. And I really, like I said, don't want to do that. So I'll probably just fix this and put it back. The other thing we're going to do is I have a few ICO and a few original Fisher 7591 tubes. I think the Fisher tubes that I have are the tan base. I'll have to go into my stock and see. And I know there's a couple of them that are very good and there's a couple of them that are very bad. So I'm going to go through that. I do have a set of matched quad tongue saw reissue 7591s that I can put in there. But if I can keep these and find a close match to one of these, to get rid of this one, I will probably just do that. So that'll be another thing we're going to do. Then we're going to get into the mods of the power supply, which I have decided I am going to do that mod to the power supply. I am not going to change the cathode or the bias circuit for the outputs. Again, I really like the way it sounds. As I kind of put in the text in my last video on this, on part 1, I did have a Fisher 500C, and that amp had a lot of punch. It was rated maybe at like 30 watts per channel versus this one, which is 27, I think they're rating. So the wattage is pretty much the same. It had a larger power transformer, but it also had a tuner in it and so forth, and it did have different windings, and it had a more conventional output section. It was a fixed bias. It was not even an adjustable fixed bias, meaning the fixed voltage on your grids was fixed. It didn't even have a pot to adjust it or a balance or anything, and the cathodes were tied directly to ground. So it was very traditional, common output, unlike this one. And because of that, the amp had a lot more punch. But again, I like the sound of these amps. The reason that I like these is because at very low volumes, you can get this thing down to a whisper. And if you have a really efficient set of speakers, this thing sounds phenomenal. You can hear every little sound at low volumes. And that's really how I judge an amp, a lot more than when you open it up, full power, filling the room with sound. I really like to be close up to a nice traditional conventional set of speakers at a low volume, and I just like that kind of that bone shaking bass and everything, and clear highs and mids without having to crank the volume up. This amp does that big time, in my experience, which again is why I kept it for so long. So I don't really want to change that. So we're going to leave the cathode circuit alone. So let's get on this. I've talked enough. Let's start working, and we'll be right back. Okay, we have successfully performed the extraction. And as you can see, this is this bell here is kind of pushed down below the core of the transformer a little bit, and this side's still pretty flush, but these tabs are kind of bent upwards a little bit. These ones are bent downwards a little bit. And so really all it kind of needs is just taken apart, straightened out, and put back together. So that's going to be easy. This transformer is not in really bad shape. I think it'll polish up just fine. There is over here just a little bit of pitting and so forth, but again, I think this will clean up. I really don't want to paint the transformers if I don't have to. I don't want to go tearing all that out and unwiring it. So I'm probably going to just clean them and leave it well enough alone. This rust here kind of needs cleaned up, and we'll do a little bit of polishing on the chassis because you can see how it should look underneath here. And really, this doesn't really look like pitting so much as just some crud, so I think it'll clean up. So that's what we're going to do. Once we get that done, we'll get the transformer put back in. I'm probably not going to show that because that's just pretty simple stuff. And then we'll kind of look at what we're going to do with the power supply. We'll go back to the schematics, kind of discuss what we're going to, our game plan, and then definitely want to get rid of those diodes. The one wire where it was wired onto those diodes from the transformer, there was a huge wad of solder on there. You know, it was soldered something fierce. The bigger the blob, the better the job, as they say. That's what I think the case was on that one. So anyway, it's all cleaned up, and let's do this transformer, and we'll be right back. Well, I knew I should have just left well enough alone. I mean, I could have just bent those tabs back and not looked inside, but no, I had to take the bell off and look inside, and look what we've got. Yuck. Gross. I can't leave that like that. So, I guess we're going to be painting the bells on this. I'm going to clean it the right way. I'll strip it down, paint it, then it won't match the output transformers, so then we will have to remove them and paint them, and, you know. Do you guys ever hear that song, "There's a Hole in the Bucket, Dear Liza"? That's what it feels like right now. One thing leads to another. So, well, that's okay. We want it to be right, so we're going to do it. All right, let me get to work. Well, the deed is done. I pulled the two output transformers, and as you can see, the insides of them are pretty rusty as well. The other thing I noticed was, like, all these screws, if you look like how damaged this one is, and the screws themselves are all different. You know, like this one doesn't have threads all the way up to the top. This one does. Some of them were cut a little bit shorter than others. So I kind of think that these have been apart before, and it looks like they may have even been painted, but I can't tell for sure. No harm though. I mean, it was done well, but being that this is not painted on the inside, this metal got really rusty. Probably got stored in a damp environment or something. So I will probably put some sort of a coating in here to prevent this from happening as well. Because it'll just rust again if I clean it and don't put some sort of a protective coating on it. So we're going to have to go down to the shop now and put these down on the bench and give them a good cleaning, get all derusting and so forth, strip all the old paint off down to bare metal, and then we can go ahead and see about getting them painted up. Hi everybody, so we're down here in the shop, and we don't come down here very often on the videos, do we? But you know, the painting and cleaning and all that, that's kind of a messy thing to do, so I thought we'd come down here. And really, this video is more about experimentation, because what I want to do is I want to see, I have my other camera down here and I have my digital recorder. And I just want to kind of see if I can take a longer view here with the camera, if I can get some decent video down here, and if I can get some decent sound. If so, maybe we'll do a couple more projects down here. especially when we get into some speaker videos that I may be doing a little bit down the road. So anyway, we have the bench here. The shop is somewhat put together. I'm still recovering from an earlier kitchen restoration we did at the house, and there was a lot of things piled here over the winter, so it needed cleaned up. I still have some more things to purge and get rid of, but anyway, that's where we are. So let's get started on this. I'll kind of show you how I clean these rusty transformer bells and do a little bit of that and then see how it turns out. Okay, so hopefully we'll be able to keep this somewhat in frame. Sorry about that video on the vacuum tubes. When I disassembled that tube, we took it apart to look at the elements. If any of you watched it, I kind of drifted off camera quite a few times. It's really hard when you're working around a camera. If you aren't staring into the viewfinder constantly, it's really easy to get off center, so I apologize in advance. So here's what I do, and this is something when I restore these transformer bells, this is something that I found is easy for me. Of course, you can use paint stripper. So you can take these and you can coat them with paint stripper and clean them off, and then you have to clean all the old chemical off, make sure it's perfect. And if it's a larger size project, I probably would do that. But in this case, we're just going to use a wire brush. We're going to use a rotary tool, possibly a drill rotary tool, and we're just going to use wire brushes, and you'll see how fast this comes off. And the added benefit of that is not only are you cleaning off the paint, but you can use the same tool to remove all of the rust. And if you recall, this thing is really, really rusty. And I hope the lighting is good in here as well. So what I do is, these are kind of awkward to hold when you're cleaning. So what I found is kind of handy is I'll just take an old scrap of plywood or wood or something, and I'll lay this out onto the wood, and then I'll just drill 4 holes, and then I'll put 4 little screws in there, not tight, just enough to hold it from moving around. And then you can either clamp this board down if it's a big object, or just lay it on the bench, and it'll kind of hold everything steady while you clean it. So I'm going to start off with the inside, and I just have 4 longer screws, and I'm going to pop those in here. And the other thing is I have my digital microphone. I have one of those Zoom digital recorders, and kind of want to see how that works down here as opposed to the camera microphone. This is a little lower end camera that I'm using compared to the one I normally use downstairs in the shop on the bench. And if you notice, I just put these in enough to hold it, but you don't want to over tighten these so that it bends the wood, or it bends the frame down. You just want it to hold it steady while you work. And then I just use a rotary tool, and I have a couple different brushes, and there's steel ones and there's brass ones, and in this case I'm going to use the steel ones. And they both kinds work well for you getting into different areas, especially because of how tight this is inside here. So we're just going to clean some of this off. I'll give you an idea of how I do it, and then we'll come back. So kind of turn this on to about a medium speed, and then you just kind of, hope I'm on camera, and you just kind of just go around it nice and easy. And that's all there is to it. And I'm just going to go through until I get it all cleaned off. Now the other thing is you may want to set up your vacuum cleaner to kind of suck up some of the rust dust when you're brushing it, because it kind of gets airborne. And you also probably want to at least wear a paper mask on your face so that you don't breathe in the dust. I'm sure this rust isn't very good to breathe in. But I'll show you another thing that I kind of like to do sometimes as well. It's very noisy, so I'm not going to show it for very long, but we'll give you an idea. Okay, so here's my little rig up that I like to use. And what I'm using here is a little strap wrench. You can see here it is. And you can buy these at, the hardware store or whatever. And they're normally used as, as a wrench. But what I found is if you take this and you clamp it into your bench vise, if you have one, and then I kind of slide this through here like this and pull it down, you can make yourself like a little makeshift dust collector. And that way, when you clean this, when you go to do all this here with the rotary tool, let's get you zoomed in a little bit, it really reduces the dust a whole lot. So I'll kind of show you what I'm talking about. And yeah, it's kind of loud, so turn your camera or turn your volume down. Word of warning. See all the dust? I hope you could see that. And you can just see how much thick dust came off of this thing. Hopefully you could see it in the camera a little bit. I can't see the viewfinder very well from this angle, but hopefully I got it in there. And you could see how it was just pulling that dust right up into the vacuum cleaner. So just an easy little tip there, if you don't like dust, especially if you're inside, like in your basement, you don't want all that dust floating around. It's pretty gross. So I'm going to finish this up, and then I'll flip it over, and I'll show you a little bit of the other side, taking the paint off, and then we'll start to repaint them. Okay, so we got these all cleaned off, as you can see, and you don't really have to get every last little bit of paint off of it, because really the main thing you want to do, these were painted before. In other words, there was kind of a second coat of paint somebody put over these. Probably these were quickly painted to make the thing sell for a little bit more money when it was purchased, or when it was put up for sale. So anyway, it's cleaned off. I hit it with a little bit of just 320 grit sandpaper, just to give it a little bit of, get rid of some of the wire brush marks. And if you use a wire brush like I did, make sure you use those brass ones, because the steel ones will actually sometimes leave scratches in the metal more so than the brass ones, where the brass ones are softer. So anyway, we got that. So now what we're going to do is I'm working right now on getting these straightened out. So you can see I got this one done, and you can see how nice and solid it is, and it's relatively straight with respect to, the level. And so this one, as you can see, is not straight. It wobbles all over the place. It's bent pretty bad. I mean, you can see the bend in it. So we're just going to kind of go through and straighten it out. So I start out just like that. And then I check for level, or I mean for 90 degrees. And if it's off, which this one's actually pretty close, and if it's off very much, then I just have a little brass rod here, and I'll go in and just kind of adjust it just a little bit until it's nice and straight. And that's it. that's all you got to do. You just need a nice metal flat surface to work on, and you can get these straightened right out. I can lay this down here and make sure there's no distortions or warps in this. The next step we want to do is you want to clean off all the impurities off this before you paint it. Even the oil from your fingers, the sanding dust, all that stuff, no matter how much you try to clean it, you just can't, just by blowing it off or dusting it off. So really you need to kind of, and this also helps get the rest of the loose paint off. So what I'm just going to use is just plain old acetone. And this is the same as nail polish remover. And it works pretty good. The nice thing about it is it completely and totally dissolves or evaporates. So it won't leave any residue behind. So you just take this and soak it. And then just start cleaning. And you saw how shiny this was to begin with. But just a quick wipe, look how much crud came off. So that's why you don't really want to skip this step. And go through the whole thing, clean it really well. Look at that. Because no matter how well you sand it or whatever you do, there's still going to be crud on here. And it will prevent your paint from adhering properly, and even worse, when the paint does adhere, it'll make it, you'll get fish eyes and all kinds of ugly looking blemishes. So I'm going to clean these off and then I'll be right back. So I put these out on these little standoff pyramids, and I went ahead and just shot them with the spray paint. Nothing really big deal. I mean, you've all seen people spray paint with a can. I'm just using this basic Krylon all-in-one primer and paint in gloss black. I like this because it has the primer and paint all in one. It is a rust inhibitor. I like it a little bit better than the Rust-Oleum. And the really nice thing is it is super fast dry time. This stuff dries in like 20 minutes. So of all the ones I've tried out, this seems to work the best. So those are, I'm going to let those harden even more. They're dry to the touch already. But, oh, did you even see them? So here's one that's all done. And like I said, they're dry to the touch, but really they need to dry for 24 hours. So I have the end bells ready to go back on the Transformers, but before I do, I'm going to clean up these wires. They're actually still pretty pliable. The insulation is good, but as you can see, they're just kind of cruddy. And what I like to use on these, it's actually used for your dashboard, the interior of a car, like for vinyl and plastics. And this is made by Armor All. You can buy, they make more generic, non-name brand ones that you can get at the dollar store. They work just as well. But basically, I'm going to take this and I'm going to clean these wires up. And not only will it make them look like new, but it'll actually protect them a little bit as well. So I'll show you how it works. So you can see this green wire is kind of cruddy and gross. And just take this and run it up here along the wire a couple times. And you can look, it comes out just shiny like new. And then when that dries, which doesn't take very long, it'll be perfect. Not to mention it takes all the crud off too. So I'll just go over all of these and get them all nice and clean. So let me finish these up, and then we're going to put the end bells on. And there they are, all back together. Let's mount them back onto the amplifier and see what they look like. The Transformers are mounted, and before we go topside and look at it, I got them rewired, and you can see I just put all the original wiring back in the way it was. But on the power supply, I did do something here. I am not going to finish wiring up the B+ part of the power supply, because if you remember, we have some parts on order and we're going to replace those first. I have the diodes and everything, but the capacitors are still on order. They won't be in for another couple of days. I also removed the power cord. Unfortunately, I really like the looks of the original Fisher power cord. I like these, and they have the little Fisher logo and everything. However, this cord was actually getting pretty bad. The plastic is starting to get sticky, which means it's getting ready to deteriorate and crack. And I just didn't want to risk it. So what I did was I had one of these nice modern cloth covered wire power cords, and I just went ahead and installed that. The other thing I did is, these little outlets here really aren't the safest things on earth. They're Bakelite, they crack very easily. So I decided to disconnect those. And there's a benefit of that, in that this switch that goes out to the volume knob splits off, and it's a double pole switch. So what I did was I just disconnected this. I tied these two together to the hot, and now I have both switch elements going on here. Now I know that when the switch closes, one contact will always connect very, just a microsecond before the other, but that won't hurt anything. The idea is we have two power switches. These are known to go bad, and so that takes care of that. I also have a proper 3.2 amp slow blow fuse now that I replaced. And again, we're going to finish this part up when the rest of the parts come in. So let's flip it over. We'll look at the top and look at how the transformers look now that they're mounted up. All right, here's where we are. We got all the terminals polished up. Got the chassis cleaned up a little bit. Transformers are mounted. They look really good. And I'm very happy with where we are right now. So I'm kind of on a holding pattern till we get these couple capacitor cans in. So I'm going to stop here. And also because my oldest daughter called, and she's off work just now. And she's going to come over, and maybe we're going to go out and get a bite to eat. So I'm going to go and enjoy myself doing that. Take a little break from this. And when some stuff comes in, we'll get the power supply modified, and then we're going to give it another test. We're going to actually test these tubes over here to find a good one that matches those other ones, and then we're going to just give it another try. All right, talk to you soon.